Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. I am Yehuda Shamroth. I live in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, and I'm proud and very honored to be able to present Rabbi Winston nearly every single week. And he's so kind and generous with his time to give us his Torah, which is always deep and very meaningful and very relevant, especially in today's day.
You haven't got the bill yet.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be a pretty big one. I haven't gotten one at all yet. Strategy for the End of Days is his newest book. Out of how many, Rabbi? How many have you written? Multiple. It's like you don't want to count grandchildren. You don't want to. Hundreds of books. The most recent one I could find near to this topic is another one that he wrote called Survival Guide to the End of Days. I'm not showing it very well. All right, I'll have to show it later. But that's my most recent End of Days book, I think, and I'm ashamed to say I don't have the new one, so I have to get busy.
It's on the way. It's on the
way. Okay, and Rabbi, don't forget to check the Rabbi's websites. His newest one is sharnunproductions.org. It's very tiny underneath of his name, along with 36.org, where you can read Parsha HaShavua, the reading of Parsha of the week from the Bible. You can also get all kinds of interesting videos and Torah lessons on every topic Jewish, including end of days and reincarnation and other important topics. So Rabbi Winston, without further ado, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Okay, continuing on with this theme, which we'll stick with for a while because it covers a lot of topics, important topics. What does it mean to have a strategy for the end of days? There's a strategy to fight a war. There's a strategy to deal with financial things. How do you strategize for the end of days? And the answer is simple: that it's not just that certain events are going to happen and you have to brace yourself for them, but they're meant to accomplish something. They're meant to bring something out. History has a very specific purpose going back long before matter existed. As random as history might seem to be from time to time, and life may seem, it's not at all. God, everything is calibrated, everything is calculated. God has worked the whole thing out. He's above time. He's not bound by time. He's not bound by space. All the limitations that we experience, he doesn't experience at all whatsoever. And so everything has already happened for him. It's already unfolded. He knows the end of the story before before we even knew the beginning of the story. It's all been set out, and we have free will to participate in that in one way or another way. And there's things going on. There's an ultimate goal, and the ultimate goal, by the way, is not even by 6,000. We're now at 5784, according to the Gemara, according to Kabbalah, also that history only lasts 6,000 years. Olam Hazeh, we call this, will only last 6,000 years, and then begins the stages of Olam Haba. There's, the final day of judgment for everybody to determine what their portion is going to be, but it's all laid out, and we're making choices on an ongoing basis to accomplish something, whether we know it or not. The basic rule of thumb is either history happens, because of you, or it happens through you. And now, either way, it's going to happen no matter what. This is what Mordechai tells Esther. It's a fundamental. He says to Esther that this redemption from Bavel has to come. It's going to happen anyhow, no matter what, regardless. The only question you're dealing with is, do you want this redemption to be attached to your name or somebody else's name? You want to play an active role in it. And this is the concept in the Gemara, Megalin Schutz Aidei Zakai and Chiyav Aidei Chayav, meaning that a person has the opportunity to make free will choices to participate in God's master plan and have whatever happens good associated with them. Like the Mishkan that was built by God, but Moshe was allowed to make it look like he was the one building it. If you were to watch it, he's holding a hammer or whatever the case, he's putting pieces in place. It looks like he's building the Mishkan, but the reality is God does everything. And we have a chance to be a part of that by willing itself. People often ask the question, what about Ishtadalus? What about making an effort? What about making free will choices to do something? Not just, but the truth is, from a Torah perspective, the ultimate Ishtadalus that we make, well, that's the technical term for making an effort. There's bitachon, where you rely upon Hashem, you trust in Him, and let Him take care of things, and you just not sit back necessarily, but let Him take care of things. And then there's the opposite, Ishtadalus, which is also based upon bitachon. It's not really the opposite, but we are directly involved. A very simple example is that you apply for a job, and you want to know if you're going to get it, your candidate. So you might make a phone call to the company and say, am I in the running? And they say, yes, don't call us. We'll call you as soon as we know. And you hang up. And at that point in time, some people call back anyhow, hoping to get somebody else, or they're simply a nudnik, and that causes more problems for them. And that would be too much ishtadlus, because it's more than what's reasonable. But if a person were to say, okay, I've done my job. I showed God that I cared about this job and our parnasa. I've made my effort physically, but now it's up to him to decide how it's going to play itself out. And that's across the board and everything. And ultimately, on a high enough level, depends on the level the person's on, but ultimately, that Ishtadalus really is only in the area of Yirah Shamayim, fear of God. That's the ultimate where we make the greatest effort, because it's also called Hishtadalus, making an effort when we take the time to learn the Sfarim, the books, the works, listen to the classes, contemplate, and meditate and do all the things necessary to come to realize that God runs the entire show. That's not easy. That's not an easy task. In fact, believe it or not, people would much rather work physically harder to accomplish a goal without God than to not be physically involved and have to mentally, intellectually, emotionally get to a point where they understand why they can rely upon God and not even do anything at some point in time. Tzaddikim, the ultimate tzaddikim themselves, they didn't have to do much physical work at all whatsoever, because they worked so hard on developing their fear of God and their trust in God. And that's a major avoda. And that's the main hishtadalus that we make in this world. The main, because the Gemara says, Kol b'yedei Shamayim, chutz b'yirah Shamayim, everything's in the hands of heaven but the fear of heaven itself, telling you that the results and all the efforts, it's all from Hashem. How many times have you tried to go do something and you were blocked from doing it? Or how many times that you didn't do something, but it just worked out that you were able to do something and it worked out in your favor? Happens all the time. And the main reason is because it depends what God wants from us. But the main thing He wants from us is to show that we care, that we appreciate life, we appreciate the opportunity to live, we appreciate the opportunity to do mitzvahs, to grow, to be a partner with God. We're honored by the opportunity to be a partner with God in the completion of His master plan for creation, and ultimately that we can go to the world to come, that we can actually go to the world to come and for eternity, and enjoy the pleasure of being connected to God. So this is not the main discussion, but this is all part of the discussion as well, because the idea of a strategy for the end of days means really, when I began writing the book and I began talking about this, it was because listening to the news and listening to where the world was going, and this is like about a year ago, 2 years ago, before this was already even as bad as it is today. But listening to what's going on and seeing the direction of mankind and how much it had changed in the course of 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and knowing that this is probably the end, that we're probably going to experience, it's just going to get worse before it gets better, that you just feel it pulling you down. You feel yourself almost being smothered by bad news and by bad attitudes and by bad things happening by bad people, seemingly bad people in the world, and not having any place to turn, other than Hashem, which of course is everything. But it's hard to, if you're not doing that on an ongoing basis, you don't feel as secure. And I thought to myself, this is not the way to go. This is not the way to go. I won't survive what's coming up if this is going to be my approach. If I'm going to look for some kind of status quo to maintain the safety and the serenity that I had up until now, right? That's not going to happen. It's not going to work that way. Not with the same level of fear of God I have right now or at that time, and understanding of how history is supposed to work. So I thought to myself, you need a strategy. You have to have it worked out. You have to figure out, not just anticipate what might be coming up, because it's very hard to know exactly, right? But at least to understand the principles and the rules much better that they're through them. Because don't forget, and this is very important, we say in Shemona Esrei, we daven to Hashem for das. The first bracha after Kedusha is a tachan el adam das, right? You grace man with knowledge. But we mentioned 3 levels of knowledge: Dea, Bina, and Haskel. Dea means factual information, Bina means understanding of that information, and Haskel means integration of the information. So on the level of Dea, you're just aware of an idea. Someone tells you, did you know the following? No, I didn't know that. Right? You don't appreciate yet what it means, but You might understand it to some degree, but you haven't heard it before. It's the first time you heard this idea. All right, that's data. Bina, you think about it and you contemplate it. Well, if that's true, it must be that this is like that, this like, and you still don't necessarily live your life by it yet because it's still new, but you at least appreciate on some level, what the idea means to life. And the last level is Haskel, from the word seichel, where you become one with the concept. There are ideas that we are one with. They're so part and parcel of who we are that if we violate the idea, we violate ourselves. We can't live with ourselves if we do something like murdering somebody else, an innocent person. Some people can murder without thinking twice, and they go home and they live with themselves because they're so detached from the goodness inside them. But other people, they are connected still, and they have their limits. They might cheat on their tax returns. They might not mind shortchanging somebody accidentally, not purposely, accidentally, right? They might ding a car and say, well, that's not such a bad dent, and drive away, which happens a lot, unfortunately, right? It's a little bit of a hit and run. But come certain things, bigger things, where with major consequences, they can't. As much as they'd like to, they can't. Because they know they go home, they're going to feel terrible about the situation, and it'll make their life more miserable than it would if they were to own up to what they did. And that's true about so many concepts in everyday life. That has to be true about the purpose of creation. That has to be true about what we're doing here. And the most amazing thing is how much we don't know what the bottom line is. Yeah, you need to get to the will to come. Yeah. And you get to the will to come by learning Torah and performing mitzvahs. That's all. It's all true. But is there more? Is that it? Right? As we see in life, there have been times when people seemingly learn Torah beautifully and seemingly do mitzvahs wonderfully, and they still die terribly, like in the Holocaust and pogroms and other times before that. What's going on? What's going on? How does it happen? If a community is keeping Torah mitzvahs pretty much, quite well, especially given the fact that they're in Galus, why would a thing like that happen? That yes, the Holocaust took a lot of people who weren't living by Torah mitzvahs, and a lot of times it wasn't necessarily their fault. A lot of times it was because bad education, bad circumstances, not so much because of heresy per se, or people saying, yes, God, I know you're really there, and I know your Torah is from Mount Sinai and true, it's all that. I'm not doing it anyhow. I'm going to go against you, like the time in Tanakh with the kings, the Malachim, right? And these were people who literally turned their backs on God, but they knew they were turning their backs on God because they knew who God was, and they knew that Torah came from Mount Sinai. That wasn't the question. They knew that. So it becomes a whole discussion how they could do that, knowing what they knew. But today, who even knows it? Even people born religious who live by Torah their entire life have a difficult time explaining how they know that God's real, God's true. And sometimes their belief gets shaken up because they all of a sudden get exposed to things that don't make sense in their framework of thinking that they were handed, it was handed to them, generation to generation, and it's still incomplete. So it's very hard to determine culpability, but certainly people who believe and they know how they believe and why they believe, and they're putting their life into what they're doing, why should they have to suffer? Why should they go through what they go through? So it raises the issue: is there more than simply learning Torah mitzvahs? And this is very important because, contrary to what many people think, learning Torah and performing mitzvahs clearly is not necessarily enough to protect you. It is clearly enough, is absolutely enough to be able to get to the will to come. Yes, every second you learn Torah, you get schar, reward in the will to come. Every mitzvah you do, you get reward in the will to come. Every extra ounce of self-sacrifice you add, you get more in the world to come, but not necessarily it will protect you from the enemies in this world. Why not? Why not? I mean, the Gemara does say that learning Torah should protect the person, or the mitzvah doing a mitzvah should protect the person. Should, but it hasn't always. So we fall back on things like that. It's because of the fact that people didn't do it with the proper intention. I mean, classically, the Gemara itself has the question in the last daf of Chulin, talking about how certain mitzvahs promise you long life, and and the Gemara also in Kedushin as well, those that need to get to Chulim. But the Gemara says that a certain boy was fulfilling the mitzvah honoring his father and mother by going after shulchan khan, a young, the young birds that send the mother away, and he did exactly right. So he's doing two mitzvahs. Those two mitzvahs of honoring your father and mother and sending away the mother bird, both are mitzvahs that promise you a long life. And the way down the ladder broke and he died. So the Gemara said, how's that possible? And the Gemara starts to examine it. The Gemara starts to say, well, first of all, who says that when it says long life, it means in this world? It can also mean a long life in the world where life is long. And where's that? The world to come. But every mitzvah basically promises you that. Every mitzvah is for the world to come. Even if it doesn't promise you. If you get to the world to come, you're already going to have a long life. Forever. That's eternity. You don't die in the world to come. So that's a little bit awkward, that answer. Another answer, yeah, it only helps you as long as you're in the midst of the mitzvah. But if you stopped in the mitzvah, so you're no longer protected. But that doesn't seem quite fair. You have to come back to the tree again. Another answer is he started to think about things he shouldn't think about, like idol worship, for example. So normally in Avera, you have to carry it out to be guilty of it. But idol worship, you only have to think about it. You just have to think but he's like, here he is doing his father's will, climbing the tree, getting doing the mitzvah shluchah kat, and all of a sudden he's doing idol worship. On a pshat level, we might be forced to answer questions that way, but on a deeper level, it can't be. It can't be. I mean, it could be, and it is, but how? Why? What? So that starts to push us in the direction of other answers, deeper answers, more mystical answers, Kabbalistic answers that imply there's more to history than we're being told on an everyday level. There's more to life than we might have understood up until now. And if history is about the fulfillment of those goals, somehow ultimately that's what's going on is for the sake of accomplishing that, then again, it can either happen because of you or through you. In other words, as Mordechai tells Esther, it can happen because of you or through you, meaning that either you can take the initiative, you can say, okay, I'm going to take history by the horns and go with it. I want to know what needs to be done, what is supposed to be accomplished by this exile, by this life in this world. What am I supposed to do? Figure it out and then start doing it. What is the war of Gog and Magog just because God says enough is enough and I'm going to destroy mankind, or is most of it, as a threat? Or is the war of Gog and Magog meant to accomplish a specific purpose? So, obviously, latter, especially once you start into Kabbalah. You get into Kabbalah, so then you begin to see principles and rules of history that are actually mind-blowing. And we discussed a lot of these in the past, like Kasher Chemana, Mysteries of Hashem, Mimas Tachbulis, which is God's kind of roundabout way of accomplishing things to make it look like it's not happening, but it really is happening. And we're constantly like, oh, Shul Fanai, which is too hard to go to right on the spot, but and Elilus, which means pretext, where God, for example, made Yaakov love Yosef more, so that the brothers would become jealous and sell their brother down into slavery, so that the whole family would go down to Egypt like they're supposed to, because it was prophesied to Avraham Avinu that we'd go down, and this was God's way of making it happen. So the whole thing with the brothers is a pretext. It's like, so how guilty are they in the end? Okay, good discussion, to understand. But it just goes to show you how God's working on multiple levels. We just oversimplify things so incredibly much, and we shortchange ourselves. So the vast majority of history are letting history happen to them, whatever, just going with the flow, hoping against hope that somehow they won't drown, they won't be affected, that somehow it will miss them. Just like, for example, the Jews in Portugal, the Jews in Spain thought maybe we're far enough away from the Nazi regime that they won't come get us. They can't come get us, and will somehow escape it, and they didn't. They got there too, and other places as well. And they almost got to England even, that without the Battle of Britain was a very close call in the end. But Baruch Hashem, the war started to turn around that time, and it was pushed back. And out of 11 million Jews, 6 million is half the European population of Jews. It's a lot of people, who got caught up in the entire thing, and in a terrible way. Not just death, but terrible death at the same time. So again, the strategy becomes, can I be focusing on something or some things, knowing what God wants from the world and me within that world? Maybe, just maybe, if I do those things now, I will be able to rise above the situation and not be affected by it, and also have that fantastic merit of being connected to the success, like Moshe and Mordechai and Esther, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the idea of a strategy for the end of days, to figure out what it is we need to accomplish and then how to do it. And by doing that, be protected, not just in terms of the situation in the world today, because it's kind of hard to imagine, how is it possible for me, amongst so many people around me, the world's falling apart, I should be affected by it. How can I even, feel for it? How can I not be connected on some level? Even if I do somehow survive, I always wondered. I never spoke to anybody about this. I never met anybody who could tell me, but I always wondered what it was like making Shabbos in America during the Holocaust. At first, I don't think they really knew the full extent that was going on, but they knew enough. And the truth is, I don't have to ask that question anymore so much, not as much at least, because we have an opportunity. It's not really an opportunity. We have a situation that tells us, because when we make Shabbos here, thank God, where we live, it's quite peaceful. But it's very hard not to talk about the war going on. The soldiers are down in the south or in the north, having to put their lives on the line and to fight, and people dying and families suffering, and of course the hostages is ongoing. You can't just shut it off. It's there, nagging at you, even if you're enjoying what you're doing. Right? So how is it possible to rise above it? So there are levels. A Gadol Ador, who's a tzaddik, whom God says, this is someone I need to. Part of being who he is to care for his brothers and sisters who are not being saved by the situation, from the situation. So that's that kind of level of protection shouldn't even exist, because we have to care. But in terms of actually being taken away and having your family affected directly by these things, this is something we seem to be able to mitigate, or at least try to mitigate. And these are what these points are all about. And we've covered a few of them so far. And the next one I wanted to discuss is the fourth point of that the whole point of Chilul Mashiach is to winnow out the spiritually unfit. What does that mean? That there's a concept in Kabbalah called bir. Again, I know we've spoken about this on different occasions for different reasons, but there's a concept called bir. Not everybody is going to survive unto the end, and there's a line in the sand, and people are either on one side of the line or the other side of the line. There's the right side of the line, and there's the wrong side of the line. There are people who are on the same page as God, and people who are not on the same page as God. And there are people who are not on the same page as God, but they might have a reason for it, and therefore God forgives them. And there are people on the right side that, but they're not doing what they should be doing. It's not absolute. There are conditions and there are details that only God can take into account. But in general, that's the idea. Because going back to the beginning of history, going back even before history as we know it, there's always been a combination of good and evil. In the very, 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 very beginning, no. In the very, very beginning, before everything went the way that God, he caused it to happen as part of the beginning of the historic process to get to the world that we're going to live in with free will, because we need free will, so there has to be evil. For evil to exist, you have to create a world a certain way. And that means having good and evil in the world at the same time. And in the Garden of Eden, the Ramchal explains, good and evil were clear, right? Adam was completely good, didn't have an ounce of evil inside of him. No Yetzer Hara, no instinct, no being drawn to the wrong side, doing things for the wrong. They couldn't even imagine abusing anything within creation. It was just clear we're here to serve God and nothing else. So how could he didn't make the mistake? Well, he made a mistake trying to serve God. He did the right thing at the wrong time. It was completely l'shem shamayim, completely for the sake of heaven, completely for the sake of rectifying creation, but it was premature. Chava too, she meant no wrong. She meant no evil. But the Yetzer Hara, in the guise of the snake, which was really just the Sitra Achra, the Satan inside the snake, came, talked to her, confused her. But the truth is, by the time the snake came to talk to Chava, the world had already been transformed by Adam's part of the sin. And though at one point in time, the only place where good and evil are mentioned is the tree, the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. The Nachash, in the beginning, the Gemara says the Nachash was just, he was a good guy. The Nachash was meant to be a helper, a friend of man and woman, to serve them. He only became what he became after Adam began to fall with the tree. And all of a sudden, where once upon a time, and even the tree of knowledge of good and evil, by the way, was not really yet the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It was actually Adam HaRishon himself, by what he did, he transformed it, and he caused a combination of good and evil. First the tree, and then it spread to everything else in creation, including us. We are a combination of good and evil, good and bad. There are parts that are not so good, and the parts are better. We eat things and we break it down. Food, everything. There's a combination. It's obviously degrees. There are levels, right? Food has bad in it, which is why the body breaks it down and gets rid of the bad part and uses the good part for nutrition. But it's all relative. And then, of course, there's extreme evil. So society has people who are a little bad, more bad, and then a lot bad. We call those people evil. So everything, as a result of the Chet Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, Adam's Chet, but part of God's master plan. No accidents here. Even though it's a sin, no accident. It's all part of the master plan. So at that point, right, when he caused it to happen, so then the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, disappeared. It was nostalgic, it says. It was removed from creation. But the reality is, you don't have to remove it. We lost the ability to perceive it, because the Gan Eden was not a place where evil could exist. And once you had evil spreading to all of the world, so now Gan Eden couldn't be down in our world. It's on a higher level. The whole creation descended spiritually. At one point, it was not even so physical. Adam was made from kasnas or. His skin was more like light than skin that we have today. He caused the physicalization of himself and the world, and this is what we got. This is what we're left with. And this world, down on a very low level, where the forces of impurity and evil can get to us and do all the time, this is called a Tarovis of Tov V'Ra. And history, from that point onward, synonymous with going back to the Garden of Eden, is all about separating the good from the evil, separating it out. And when you do that, you rectify the world and you rectify yourself. And this can happen in various different levels, different ways. As we said, eating a fruit, eating a vegetable, just eating food in general, chewing the food, digesting it, your body will separate the good from the evil. Get rid of the evil, and then you'll digest the good. That's the way creation has been set up. Ideas, you're thinking about something. It's a common. There are good ideas and there are bad ideas. There are better ideas and okay ideas. And when you finally think it through, and you mevarer, right? A person, brer is a choice from the word biru, which means separate, and borur means clear, because it separates out. As long as things are mixed together, even what's good and bad, it's hard. It's like white and black paint. You put them together, you get great paint. The black's there and the white's there, but you can't see them because they're combined together. You separate them, and it's clearly black and it's clearly white. And this is the ongoing process of history. And the ultimate, again, you can do it in your own personal life. When a person becomes a chosi b'tshuva, a classic case in point, excuse me, this is what they're doing. When they came in, when they first came in and they sat down in a class as a completely secular Jew, or part, and they had ideas, they had perspectives that had good and some right, but also some stuff that didn't belong, stuff that maybe came from secular society, that they accepted as being true because they knew nothing else, because they hadn't been taught anything else. And whatever education they had in Judaism was very limited, and usually through not so taken so serious and accurate and exciting and inspiring. So that's the path they went, and for some reason, somehow, God brings them to a class, or they stumble upon a book, maybe even physically, literally, right? And they read it, or some idea catches them, or they have a question about the stories about how people got to Judaism, to Torah, is unbelievable. But they did. And once they did, they listened and they heard something. And I've seen it where people come in and they argue vehemently. They don't accept it. It's not true. And they argue. And they keep arguing until they run out of argument. And as they start to do that, they start to realize that they never really thought through, that a lot of their opposition was more emotional than intellectual. And they start to back down. And as they start to back down, they start to see it more clearly and realize, no, this is very different. When I was my early years in yeshiva, I was Eretz Israel, and I would come back in the summers to visit my family to a couple of months to say hello, and invariably I got into discussions with a lot of people who I knew before I had become religious, and they still were not. And some people were curious and they wanted to know, they asked questions, and some people just had questions in general and sometimes just about Israel. But in having these discussions, it would be amazing how many times that people would come to me with a question, and it was like 4 or 5 ideas combined together, and combined together was confusing. But if you separate the idea out and say, no, but this is a separate concept. Let's look at this concept first and this concept second. And as you start to break it down for them and separate the ideas, all of a sudden they get clarity too. And I've seen people, come in, asking these questions with no intention whatsoever to become religious, to learn Torah. They just have questions, and they're honest enough to ask them. I was there in sessions where Rav Noach Weinberg Tzitzel used to speak, or Rav Yaakov Weinberg, used to speak to groups of people who somehow they were gathered in to be able to come to some kind of class. Sometimes there was a boardroom meeting in some very big firm in the afternoon, lunch and learn, and they would come. They'd be invited, either curiosity or out of a favor to the person who was setting up the whole thing up. And they came, whatever the reason, whatever the divine providence, they came, they were there. And sometimes they never even had a question before they came in, but hearing what was being said, that sparked a question inside of them. And, they got enough nerve to ask that question. And the rabbi answered it in a particular way, which prompted a second question, and then a third question. And they might go home today. Right, but somehow something was stimulated. It's absolutely remarkable how such a small impact in the beginning can lead to such a huge impact in the end. And over time, people have literally started going to classes, started doing more reading, and now today with the internet, I wonder how many people. I know one particular case where someone came over to me and said to me that they had stumbled onto a parsha sheet while at a college, because we're taking a break, and they came across an idea, and that was the beginning of their getting involved in Yiddishkeit. How many people have gone through that experience? How many people has that happened to? But in the midst of doing that, they somehow start to open up, and they start to realize that what they thought about life was not accurate. And then the more they do that, the more they break it down, the more they understand. But I would find that so many people, like, the ideas were all grouped together. No wonder they couldn't answer the question. There's two things going at the same time. And as you broke it down, you separate the ideas out and say, this is one idea, this is another idea, here's the answer for that. Then, oh yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I hear that. And then more discussions follow, and the person starts to learn more and more. This process is not accidental. We do it all the time in everyday life, or we're supposed to, at least. unfortunately, too many people run away from those kinds of challenges, intellectual challenges, emotional challenges, thinking, I don't have to go through that. If I can avoid it, why not? Sometimes you have to run away today to fight the battle another day. Understood. That's strategy too. But so often people don't realize that is the thing that God's putting in front of you. That's stimulation. You were irked, that got to you, that made you stand back, like you're all prickly because of it, right? That's God talking to you, saying, here, distinguish between this and this, and you'll be on your way. You'll have a clear understanding of life, and you'll be moving closer to the truth, which is what you have to do. So this idea of separating between good and evil is ongoing all the time on all levels, in the natural world and in the supernatural world even as well. But this is the process. And specifically when it comes to people, because what people don't realize, you see it, it's just so clear that 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60, even longer, but certainly this, 30 years ago, that you could sit on the fence. There were lots of things you could avoid. There were issues you could say, I'm not interested in that particular thing. It doesn't talk to me. I don't feel the need to be involved in that discussion. He's upset. I don't want to be upset. So I'm going to stand back. And that's the way it was for quite a period of time. And therefore, it was very easy not to know someone's position on something. When God knows what's going on in your heart more than we know what's going on in our hearts. But it was easy to just, blend in. So, and instead, over the last little while, more and more things have come up that literally have been, so divisive. And when I say divisive, I don't just mean tearing families apart and friends apart and all that, but pushing people in one direction or another. And the more that push takes place, the closer we come to the end. Because as we see from past redemptions and history in general, the rules of creation we're talking about, that ultimately speaking, when God lowers the boom and he closes the curtain on history, where you will be standing at that time will be a function of your free will choice that you will have gotten to because you took the time to clarify who you are, what you believe, and where you stand. And the issues that God has been throwing at us and through the world, through the media, through leaders, through even our own friends and family and educators, whatever has come into our sphere of existence, and we're aware of it, and it touches us, and it makes us think, it makes us ask. That's God. That's God asking a question, one question. Who are you? I mean, I know who you are, but do you know who you are? What do you think? What do you believe? Where do you stand? Because when it comes to the end of everything, that's what it's all about. That's what's going to happen. The war of Gog and Magog, Chedli Mashiach, anything that we're going to go through along that way, God is doing it just to push us to find out where we stand. Sometimes we surprise ourselves, but you can't just let it happen to you. You have to think about it now. People, look at the world. Okay, as bad. There's a reason why people are not freaking out and running to make Aliyah. Some are, but not everybody. There's still millions of Jews in America and in England and Canada and South Africa and places around the world where Jews are living who, they think about it maybe across it, but they're not running because right now they still feel safe enough, hoping that somehow, as bad as it is today, it won't get any worse. So they feel, it's okay. One of the things that you can learn from the time of Tanakh, that, you have kings like Menashe, you have kings like Achav, Yeravim, bad people, bad kings. Again, we said before, they believed in God. They knew that God existed. They knew the Torah was true. How could they possibly do the evil that they did? And the answer really is actually surprising. The answer is because God had mercy. God had mercy, meaning that as much as he could have punished them then and there for what they were doing, he held off. He held off for long periods of time. Some of these kings lived and died without much happening to them that would show God's distaste for them, even disgust. And they were able to die. What happens to people? You see today all the time. People it might be bad, and some, I guess God doesn't like these kind of things. But look, he's not responding to it. He's not punishing people because of it, not in any obvious way. So even though this is psychological reality, a certain cognitive dissonance, that we know that this could come back one day, certainly the world to come on the day of judgment, all the truth is laid out. There's no trial period. There's no time to do tshuva. It's all the facts. It's a judgment. So there, for sure, it will catch up to a person. But in the meantime, a person should be saying to themselves, I should be dealing with it now. Why wait till God decides to lower the boom on me and pay me, in real time? Why? That's crazy. So some people actually wake up while they can, while it's still peaceful, because that's the time to do it. Now, the Gemara says, a person doesn't do a sin unless a spirit of insanity enters them. They have to be insane to do a sin. It's talking about people who believe in God, Torah, and obviously people today would be considered technically insane because they don't believe in God. And they don't, they do sins thinking it's the right thing. That is a level of insanity from the Torah's perspective. But we're talking about people who know better. They're clear, and they still do the Avera. So you have to be crazy. You have to be out of touch with reality to do a sin. So then the question is, if that's the case, so why can't I just simply plead insanity on Yom Kippur and not have to do all the vidu I do? Why am I culpable? And the answer is, you're not really culpable for the sin. You're culpable for not having prepared yourself for the situations where you're going to be tempted and then fall to the sin and do it anyhow. In other words, it's during the quiet moments. It's during the times you can think. You have the luxury of time to think and to work things out and to do the research. It's running out. We're getting more. It's getting more tense and more distracting all the time. But there's still time to do that. That's Ezu Chacham, that's a true Chacham, a true wise person who looks ahead and says, okay, I may not be able to deal with the situation later on, so let me deal with it now while I can, while still quiet. So don't be fooled by the fact that what's going on today, as bad as it is not as bad as some people think, it can become. The only reason that everything is still going on today is not because God stopped paying attention, not because God stopped caring, and not because people are not culpable for what they're doing. It's because God is simply having mercy. He's holding back to give us a bit more time to work on things before there's no more time left. And then you just face the music, whatever happens at that point in time. Think it through now, right? Make that separation. Decide on what side of the line that you exist, you want to exist, you should exist. And if you don't know, ask people who can tell you and help you. And then find out what's missing, and then make that change so that you find yourself when the music does finally start or end, right? You are on the proper side of the line, and that is one of the best strategies you can have for the end of days. Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi, okay, thank you. That was really fascinating and covered a lot of topics. And I had a question. Now I can't think what it was. Because I was focusing on what your wrap up was, but I guess what you're trying to say is that we have to decide where we stand on the side of God or the side of the world.
Yeah, and what it means, it's just, you just can't. That's just the start of it. But what does it actually mean to be on that side? And every aspect.
Part of the preparation for what's coming.
Yes, yeah.
It's like being prepared, like you always talk about. Gemara always talks about being prepared for Shabbos. You can't wait until 2 minutes before Shabbos to start cooking. Preparing for the end of days is it's a Shabbat of history, basically, right? So we have to prepare, and hopefully you'll talk more about that as time goes on. How more we should prepare for that. Yeah, and I was going to. This question I have, and I keep interrupting myself. All right, so I'll come think of it, and we'll ask you for next week. And Rabbi, thank you so much for joining us. And people have been really enjoying this. The good comments, I'll pass them on to you. And everybody have a Shabbat Shalom. And I just want to say that I do a lot of volunteer work with soldiers, and I can tell you there's multiple stories of amazing Chayalim out there who are devoting themselves with such an attitude. I don't know any other country that takes care of their soldiers the way we do, and cares for them and loves them and feeds them, and not just me, but millions of other people. But also, I work at in the Gush Etzion area at a refreshment center for the soldiers, and one after the other, every soldier came in with whistling, singing Tehillim. It was amazing. And I said to each one of them, I saw like 20 of them today, and I said, "How are you? Chol b'seder, mitzuyan, excellent." And this was right. They read the same news that I read today, that 5 Chayalim fell today. They read that same. And here our boys are still, this is just being part of the Jewish people is the most amazing thing. This is just one tiny aspect of it. But I feel like even if some of them aren't religious, I think they know what side they're on,
In some respects, they have an advantage because they're in a crisis that forces them to have an attitude. They don't have room to play. They have no room to play. They have to literally make a decision who they're going to be, what they're going to do, and how they're going to deal with it. The rest of us kind of drift, in what we do, and there's what to learn from all that.
Yeah. Okay, Rabbi, thank you so much. Have a Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos, everybody. And don't forget your hostages. I have my pin on. Everybody, if you want one, please contact me.